Incredible when you get into a Champions Cup final week where you think that the media cycle is just going to be all about the match, and suddenly we have these two huge facets in the media over the last couple of days. The Joey Carbery situation, and yesterday we all kind of breathed a sigh of relief when Stuart Lancaster said, listen, I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying at Leinster for the time being. And then after a while you think to yourself, wait a minute, why am I relieved? Of course he's going to stay at Leinster. Why the hell would he go to Harlequins?
I think there's a nice old-fashioned kind of healthy respect about how Stuart operates, in the sense I think he values loyalty. And I think in modern professional sport, when a coach has been through the ringer, like he was vilified. I mean, he had a superb 4 years. He had a bit of a nightmare World Cup, and then in the, unfortunately, as is the way regularly in the English media, he built up, put on a pedestal, and then absolutely tortured in public. I think when Leinster actually made the appointment for Stuart, it wasn't all that well received initially, because people thought, why are they going this route for a guy who's gone, who has been what was perceived to be a failure? And I think Stuart was never, he was massively underrated because of the criticism. And I think he's got a huge loyalty towards Leinster, and he feels a debt to repay them because it's helped rebuild his career and his reputation. But no one has helped rebuild it better than Stuart himself. I think he's backed himself. He's one of the only coaches I've heard from players that they both respect his knowledge and they really like him too. There's very, very rarely you get that combination in coaches. So it's not a feather in a coach's cap to be liked, but it doesn't do any harm. And I think he's respected and liked in equal measure.
For sure, I think it's a great news story all around that he's staying put. And I was just reading Charlie Morgan in the Telegraph yesterday, who's often on the show actually, and he was making the point that Stuart Lancaster is much better when he's not spinning too many plates. Like obviously when he's with the RFU in the England job and handling different sorts of things outside of what he's really good at, which is being a coach. Whereas now he's doing his job. Of course, he's talked about Joey Carbery and may have a hand in day-to-day negotiations because, as you say, the players love him so much. But ultimately, he's back to being what he is best and doing what he does best, and that's the best thing for him. If he gets back to being a negotiator and handling contracts and handling the office job as well as the coaching on-field job, that's when problems might arise for Stuart Lancaster.
Yeah, essentially England manager, wasn't he? When he towards the end of his time as England head coach, he was England manager, and he just never spent enough time in the tracksuit on the training pitch, what he loves, and it's clearly what he's best at.
That seemed to be like an inevitable transition because it's such a big job that I think he was probably selected to be the England head coach initially and became that director of rugby role. And what let him down really in terms of the World Cup was probably the Sam Burgess issue and a few selection issues. It probably really wasn't the content of his coaching in any way. So I know he gave a great interview on News Talk to Joe Malloy about 5-6 months ago, and he spoke about the advice he received from Wayne Bennett, the legendary rugby league coach. And Wayne Bennett advised that in your next job to Stuart, wherever or whatever it is, make sure you 100% want to do it, and whoever is recruiting you 100% wants you, and there's a come and get me plea from both sides. That he felt that was the case in Leinster, and nobody's really looked back.
And it feels, even just looking at his quotes around Carbery, which were in the press yesterday or the day before, I think, it just seems there's a general serenity there. It's like this could become a crisis if there was somebody bad at handling the media or who just isn't as chilled out as Stuart Lancaster is in a good way. Whereas he didn't bat away the questions. He answered them and everything is fine. It doesn't actually matter that one of the prodigious talents of Leinster is being linked with Ulster or maybe even Munster on the week of their biggest game of the season.
But he probably finds the environment here, media-wise, a walk in the park.
I would imagine.
Yeah, true.
You think of the torture chamber that he has had to negotiate as England head coach, and the barbs that are constantly been fired at him. It's a much bigger marketplace. It's a far bigger media core, and situations like this are just so handy for him to deal with now, given the experiences that he's been through.
I would have thought, with all due respect to the Irish media and the integrity of journalism, is, it's great, but he was vilified in England. He was hauled over the coals, and it got personal. And it's never been like that in Irish sports media. And I think there's a nice line there, and there's a healthy respect, generally speaking. Obviously, there are times when things get a bit edgy with coaches and the media. It's natural, but I think there's a mutual respect Stuart has, and with the media in terms of. He's generally fielding rugby questions. He's his personal life's not being called into question, or his integrity and all these things. When you've been through it, I would imagine it's quite a lovely environment to be involved in, albeit tricky questions about Joey.
Yeah, like they are tricky questions, and surely there is kind of a mild sense of inconvenience about the timing of it all.
Yeah,
another coach would have said, or another team, or franchise in a week like this would have said, look lads, we're building up to a European Cup final here. I only want to talk about Racing. Not Leinster. They're just so relaxed about everything.
Yeah, I to be honest, I'd love to see Joey stay in Leinster. I think it's a great environment for him to learn. And I saw a quote yesterday that said, I think it was actually Ger had said it, that if you look where Johnny Sexton was at Joey's current age, Joey's probably ahead of him, in terms of his development already. And it's noteworthy because Joey is developing, and one of the best ways to learn in any of these sporting environments is actually to learn from your peer group as opposed to learn from the coaching. Obviously you're going to get direction and coaching, but for him to be side by side with Johnny Sexton on a daily basis, he's going to learn by absorbing and just witnessing how Johnny operates in a team environment, and that's hugely impressive.
But has that absorption not already happened to a certain extent now, where he's almost at capacity of the knowledge he can gain from Johnny Sexton? If he's such a quick learner, as people say.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. I think his position, Ollie Campbell was one of our greatest ever out halves, and had a kind of a well-known phrase about out half play. I mean, it's the longest apprenticeship going. You're still learning 9-10 years into it. When you get to kind of the finished article as Johnny Sexton is, that took him a hell of a long time. And let's not forget, had Felipe not got that knee injury in the semi-final in 2009, Johnny Sexton looked like he was probably on his way to Harlequins. And he had played AIL club rugby that year and had a couple of poor games at AIL club level. But to his greatest and kind of eternal credit, when it mattered in the 2009 semi-final, he stepped up, got that difficult kick, banged over the drop goal from the halfway in the final, and never looked back, and showed what mental strength he had. I think Joey would get exposure to greater game time at 10, probably on the back of this tug-of-war alone. I think the Leinster management might reassess the usage of Ross Byrne as much. They might look and say, well, are we actually using Joey in the best possible way, and can we help the Irish squad in a more relevant way in the lead up to the World Cup? I think it's a better option for Joey than going up and playing in the Ulster environment.
Where does that leave Ross Byrne then?
I would say it leaves Ross Byrne in his natural habitat. He's the third best of the three of them, so it doesn't change things for him.
But in the eyes of Lancaster and Leo Cullen, is he the third best of the three of them? Yeah, well, possibly not. They've picked him ahead of Joey on more occasions than the reverse, but I think and I think Ross has been excellent. I think Ross is a different player to Joey. He's more strategic. I think one of the things that Ross has is essentially a smaller toolkit. He's got 3 or 4 things that he does really well, and he sticks to them. Joey can do about 12 things really well, and sometimes you might get confused on which is the appropriate tool at the right time, and that's something that comes with Joey's natural talent and ability. He can probably unlock defences in 3 or 4 different ways, where Ross might be a bit more settled and play a kicking game, lie deep, or play a distribution game. Joey's got those 2 sides to his game, and he's got his attacking side as well. He's his natural instincts and flair that often you need to curb as a 10. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think also Johnny is not going to play a huge amount of rugby next year in the lead up to the World Cup, and if Joey or Ross were in a different province and Leinster got 1 injury and Sexton's in cotton wool, like, where do they go then? You also need to be careful what you wish for. Clearly Joe Schmidt wants what is very obviously his second choice 10 to have a lot of game time in that position heading into the World Cup. Say, for example, he heads up to Ulster now mid pre-season or after the Australian tour, an Ulster club that potentially won't have their head coach until January, that may not be playing Champions Cup rugby, and they stink the joint out for another season. Joey Carbery arrives into a training camp in for the Six Nations or beyond that towards the World Cup with his confidence shot to pieces
Absolutely.
after a really difficult season whereby maybe a few dubious performances draws the ire of the Ulster support that don't want him there in the first place because he's not one of theirs. He's a Leinster guy who's been thrown up there but they can't produce one of their own. And you end up in June and Joey Carbery's not the second best fly half in the country because all of his belief and his confidence has completely been diluted. I mean, that's an outside chance. And I know I'm painting worst case scenario here, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Not at all. And although it sounds bleak, if we were to look at across sports, make it transferable, like show me a Premiership soccer player who goes out on loan and comes back to his original club a better player. It doesn't happen all that much. You know, you see a guy who's on a big money deal or who's at the top of his game in the English Premiership getting shipped out on loan somewhere. It's usually not good news for the player. And you know, it's I can't think. I'm sure there are examples, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a guy.
Daniel Sturridge perhaps is one of those examples over the last 5-10 years. But as you say, it
Possibly,
usually you're being loaned out for a reason. Either you're 17 years old or you're 21 and you're not in the first
It's
team.
not quite worked out for you.
Exactly. Lukaku at West Brom had a great time, but had he been pulling up trees at his parent club, they wouldn't have let him go. And Joey Carbery is not being considered as a potential exit from Leinster because he's playing bad rugby.
No, I think as soon as you get on that, getting farmed out for experience elsewhere, as soon as you're on that merry-go-round, it's a tricky one to get off. It's very hard for him to go in and be commanding in the Ulster role. If he's been assured that, look, we're only going to send you up there for a year, what kind of executive control on the field is he going to have with senior players when they know he's going to leave and go back to Leinster? You know, it's very, very tricky. And
how do Ulster view that then?
Yeah.
This guy's only in to better himself and the green jersey. It's nothing really to do with Ulster rugby.
Yeah.
How invested is he in this really?
And if you're a head coach and you want a guy who's going to implement what you're, Dan McFarland, if and when he gets to Ulster, is going to have his own views on how the game is played. He may not want a player in the style of Joey Carbery. He may want a guy who's his kind of commander-in-chief on the field, who's an entirely different profile to Joey. So there's so many kind of variables in this situation. I genuinely think he'd be better off for all concerned if he stayed in Leinster.
I dare say it's going to be something that might rumble on for the next couple of weeks and months.
So.
We should talk about Bilbao on Saturday. And you look at the season that Leinster have had, the teams they've beaten. I think we've been shocked almost to a certain extent with the ease at which they've won some of these games. And my initial question here is this definitely the toughest game of Leinster's season? Are we sure about that?
I'm not sure, based on the likes of their captain and probably talisman Mashino being out. He's central to how they operate. They're also, battling on all fronts in the sense the top 14 is quite relentless at this time of year, where the Leinster key players are getting a bit more of a rest at the tail end of a tough
Although
season.
we should say that of the 15 that started against Agen last week, none of them started against Munster. So they have been able to rest their players. It's a little bit of a misnomer that they're just being flogged to death this time of the season. They have kept
they do.
their
They've
best players
depth, and they
under
have
wraps.
the money,
So
I'm not sure if
all
it's
of
their
these
most
guys will have
difficult
had at
game,
least
though.
2 weeks off.
Yeah, but I suppose to go back specifically, is it going to be their most difficult game? I don't know on paper, is it going to be their most difficult game? They've beaten the current leaders of the English Premiership, the French top 14, the Pro 14 and the back-to-back European Cup winners all in one season. And like you said, with apparent ease, but I think it is apparent, there's been a huge amount of diligence and attention to detail and work ethic in those performances. I wouldn't be surprised, though Leinster won't want to hear it, but if they get some momentum early in that game, that it ends up facile, if I can risk saying that, European victory. They had one against Ulster in 2012, and I think if they get a good early 30 to 40 minutes, I could see them managing it easily.
Well, they've lost their Sexton. If Leinster went into this game without Johnny Sexton and Maxime Machino was starting, suddenly it's not. I still wouldn't think it's a 50-50 game. Brings us back to the Joey Carbery discussion, but it's a completely different complexion on the build-up. And Leinster do have their Sexton and Racing don't have theirs. And let's face it, Munster still scored 22 points against them, kicked away an awful lot of ball, made some really poor decisions with the ball, fell off a huge number of tackles. Going through the missed tackle stats, I was going through them there. They missed a quarter of their tackles in Bordeaux, 18 in total. Leinster missed 16 against the Scarlets, despite having to make 60 more tackles in the game. Leinster are not going to give the likes of Teddy Thomas the leeway that he got against Munster. That just simply will not happen.
It was quite uncharacteristic of Munster as well. I mean, I think we all expected a hugely physical and combative Munster to go out there and try and lay down a marker early on, and I think it was quite a shock for everyone to kind of witness what happened in the first 30 minutes there. For whatever reason, in the mentality, and there's been debates about the South African tour, and no one will ever know. You know, we could have 20 of the Munster team sit down in a room and probably give you 20 different reasons. It's hard to bottle and to encapsulate why it went so wrong for that first 30 minutes. But I'd be even more shocked if on the back of that Leinster had a repeat performance in that first 30 minutes. I think Leinster have hit the ground running in most of their games this year. The level of intent in the first 20 minutes in that Scarlets game was fearsome, and indeed it continued before, lead up to half time. Straight after, it was relentless. And the other most impressive part of their run in Europe this year has, I think, been they've showed they can win playing different styles of rugby. Like, they've won ugly, they've won physical, they've won playing hard rucking rugby, they've won playing creative rugby running from deep with offloads. They've won with kicking games. Like, they've changed it a lot. They've won with defence.
And being on the front foot, coming from behind, all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at this Racing team, the one thing that always comes up as like a buzzword is line-out defence. So
Yes.
Explain to us how that works for Racing and how that might potentially work against Leinster, because I fear that Leinster have very few weaknesses, but is potentially Racing's strength one of Leinster's weaknesses?
I'm not sure if it's a Leinster weakness, but I think there's a familiarity there, and I think, again, Munster kind of crawled up their own backside a bit with the Dunne-Ryan issue. So there's always going to be an awareness. There's a familiarity there, obviously, with Dunne's history in Munster. He goes into the opposing squad, and there's an element of, you get so complex, the walls start to close in, and teams are trying to second guess each other. Munster did an early line out with Scannell thrown to the front that looked to me really like they'd psyched themselves out. Dunne knows our calls. Billy Holland is on record saying, look, you can't fundamentally change the calls because it's a complex system. So they did tweak a few things. But essentially, the line-out is best and most functional when your timing is right. It's not so much the strategy and the call. The strategy and the call is giving your own players direction on where the ball's going, and the opposition defence can read it. You can do intelligence and counter-intelligence to the nth degree. But if your timing is right and you're getting up in the air first, the throw is on the money, the lift is good, the footwork is good, you're going to win 95% of your line-outs regardless.
Knowing where the ball is going is one thing.
Yeah.
Actually stealing the line-outs is
stopping
another.
it is the other. I think Nakarawa and Ryan are obviously very, very good line-out operators, but Leinster absolutely have got a strength there. I'd imagine they'll probably stick with Fardy again. You've got Ryan, you've Toner. I mean, there's three serious
Even
operators.
use Levy as a line-out option this season. They can keep them guessing.
Yeah, I think it's a very important part of the game, but it's probably going to, I suppose, dilute its importance if Leinster's execution is good. And if they don't fall into the trap of, who knows what, intelligence, counter-intelligence, analysis, all that type of stuff of each other, you can kind of crawl up your own backside a bit. You got to back your process, back your ability to do it under pressure, and ultimately I think they will do that.
So it seems the very thing that I've been reading about Racing in terms of their biggest strength is not actually going to have that much of an impact against Leinster. So
you're asking a fly half how he thinks the line-out's going to go.
I was a great line-out technician. I was a serious line-out technician in my day.
What do they target then? What is there to target about Leinster? I fear there is nothing. Not that I fear for Racing in any way, but if I was in their shoes.
Hugely difficult. I mean, when I looked at Ireland, during the early parts of the Six Nations, we were playing a certain brand of rugby that I felt if you were able to match us physically, which no one actually was able to do. But if you were able to match us physically, what was our alternative route to success? That was a concern of mine in the early stages of the Six Nations, because we were playing a very definitive physical brand that, once matched physically, can be stopped. If you're trying to counter the current Leinster squad by just matching them physically, they'll run around you, or they'll offload better, or they'll attack space through attacking kicks. Sexton, probably 3 or 4 kicks in the opposition half, like really smart, really aggressive tactically, quite brave to kick possession away. They have multiple ways to win. It's probably the reason I'm not a coach, because I can't think of a way I would attack them. So the two Laurents, Labie and Travers there in Racing, I can't imagine they're going to sit down and identify 3 key weaknesses there. I think they've just got to accept there are very few weaknesses. They've got to look for an exceptional performance from within their own group, as opposed to hand-picking 3 or 4 holes in the Leinster setup, because I don't think they're going to find any.
If it gets to the final quarter and it's still on the balance, you can really only see one winner. They were out on their feet against Munster and Bordeaux in the heat in Bordeaux. There was lads not even making rucks, let alone being ineffective at rucks. They started to miss some tackles. The defensive shape started to go a bit awry. It was just Munster didn't have the creativity within their backline to actually expose that. Leinster have at least 3 distributors in their backline, in Johnny Sexton, Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose, 4 if you throw Eason Matheu in there. Absolutely. And then James Lowe, who can play the ball out for the back of the hand and do anything in a given moment. They don't have any weaknesses under the high ball, with Rob Kearney being there, and they have their first choice scrum half back fit, and you just wonder, it's very difficult to see them having any joy that they got against Munster in this game against Leinster, because all the holes that you can pick in the Munster performance, not only would you not associate those types of holes with Leinster, but Leinster have had 3 weeks to look at it and make sure they don't fall foul of the same issues that Munster had. For example, 2 of the tries led from the ball being whipped out wide by Racing, and just 1 step inside took 3 Munster defenders out of it, because they were so keen to avoid being beaten by Tama on the outside, that once you come back in, the entire midfield is there, and Vakatawa is in midfield, and we know what he can do. So I just don't see any of the major Munster issues being replicated on Saturday.
No,
are we talking ourselves into a really disconcerting level of overconfidence?
No, I don't. I think it's justified. Like I think there's there's been a change in Irish rugby in the last couple of years where we're okay being favourites. I think we were okay going into the Six Nations. We were comfortable going to Twickenham. We were the favourites, and we carried that with relative ease, and we were by far the most convincing team on the day. It's a very non-Irish approach to sport. I think typically our successes have been in pockets when we're underrated and we're the underdogs, and when historically we've been put on a pedestal, we've cracked and we haven't carried the mantle of favourites with confidence. I think this Leinster group, they both carry it with a sense of comfort that they're okay being favourites, but they have something probably not has been addressed all that much, and they've got an incredible sense of hunger. It's really tangible in that group. There's a lot of guys there who are young guys looking at a Leinster, looked like a dynasty at one stage with 3 Heineken Cups. You've got a middle-of-the-road crew in terms of age profile who came at the tail end of those last successes and haven't won their own medals. And then you've got the older gang and the likes of Sexton, who are putting it up to the young crew and going, are we a champion team or not? And in the likes of James Ryan, Dan Levy, Luke McGrath, Ringrose, there's a huge hunger in those guys to say we belong up here, and we belong being one of these guys who's got a star on the jersey. And that is, to me, one of the defining aspects of this Leinster squad. Apart from all the talent and strategy and great coaching we've talked about, there's just a hunger in their play, and the great barometer of that is like your defensive work and your line speed, and your ability to win a breaking ball on the ground. There's a pack of wolves mentality about their group that I think probably isn't there in a kind of a.
You used the word already. Relentless is the best way to describe the way this Leinster team go about their business.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's there in that Racing group, albeit it's a pretty well put together squad with a lot of depth.
What do you do at 10 if you're one of the Laurents? Are you going with Dan Carter now that Machino's not there, or are you going to put your faith in Lambie to conduct the game? Because in French rugby, the emphasis is so much more on the scrum half.
Yes,
We've seen the great French halfbacks over the last 20 years have been scrum halves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard to come up with a great French 10. You got these mercurial guys like Cambrabero and Michalak, who's actually retiring in this weekend. But it is going to have to be on the 10 this weekend. So do you go with the World Cup winner, who's 34 and way past his best, the 35, or do you go with Lambie?
Even if Machino was fit, I still would have picked Carter. I think it's a no-brainer going into the game. I think the guy, albeit he's beyond his greatest moments, he's absolutely got the capacity to turn up for European Cup final. He's going to give the group probably a sense of calm and a sense of purpose, because he's comfortable in the environment, and even if he changes tack midway through a European Cup final, people are going to follow him. It is one of the greatest traits of French rugby over the years, that the general on field is their 9 and generally a place kicker, and the guy who's in to replace Machino also is a place kicker. I would have gone with Carter for the final regardless. I think Lambie is kind of, he did very little in the Munster game to affect the actual victory. He didn't have a huge imprint on the game. It was more out wide. It was their, from 12 out that they really did their damage, and in the back row. And I think he was a facilitator and just got the ball out to those channels. European Cup final to me is a no-brainer. I would start Carter.
Just one other element of this when it comes to the coaching element, and it's not just Cullen, it is Travers as well, who are going to be whichever team wins, they'll become the first player and head coach to actually win the European Cup in both those positions. And I just find it so ironic that Leo Cullen could be the first person to have this individual accolade, because the reason he will win with Leinster on Saturday is because of any lack of individualism, any lack of ego is the reason why Leinster have been so successful to collaborate with Stuart Lancaster, and that has manifested itself in what you were talking about a few minutes ago, about this unbelievable squad mentality that whoever has a jersey will fight for the team, and there isn't really any selfishness there. So there's an irony there, isn't there?
Well, I think teams always reflect the personality of their coaches. Whether coaches try to avoid that or not, it just comes out in the group. And it's so plainly obvious that Leo and Stuart there's no power battle between them. There's no ego. It's a huge mark of Leo's leadership skills that he sought out a guy like Stuart Lancaster to come in. When Leo had a tricky first year, a lot of coaches would tighten up, back themselves, get a team around them with possibly less experience, and say, I'm the guy who's in charge and I'm going to do it my way and my way only. Leo went the other direction and had the sense of awareness that if he got a guy he had the foresight as well and awareness to say, we get a guy like Lancaster involved, and we work together on this, the sum of our parts will be greater. And it's a hugely impressive thing to do as a young coach. I think it's taken pressure off Leo. It's allowed him do what he does best. He's well known to be a cerebral type of guy. He's not all that, boot biting bollock and emotion. He's going to be analytical. He's going to be technical. He's got a clearly defined role, I think, within the forwards and how he coaches them. And then he's obviously got a very, very defined selectorial role. And I think he does have the final say. But I think the mutual respect working between the two of them is it's great to see. And it's, like you said, it's ironic that he could be the first guy to do it. And to do it with the kind of level of humility that he's done it, it's a lovely thing to see in the game. It's
an 11-point spread on Saturday. Will Leinster cover it?
I think they will.
Not even asking if they're going to win. After the
they'll hate these predictions, but I could see them covering that spread, yeah.
What do you reckon?
I'm uncomfortable with the question, are Leinster going to beat the spread? Not are Leinster going to be European champions come Saturday evening. I think there's a chance this will be a landslide, but it's a final, and that old cliche, anything can happen in a final. The best team usually wins these finals, and I think Leinster are the best team, and for that reason they are going to win the game. But whether it's by 11 plus is a different story. I do feel that in the last quarter this Racing team are going to be out on their feet. And Leinster may well get some big scores in that last quarter, but I have a feeling that the game may be done before we get there.
Well, good to see the Irish inferiority complex alive and well this morning. Andy Dunne, thanks a million, appreciate it.